Southern California is very different from Idaho in more ways than one. But the main focus of this podcast is specifically on two different types of education systems. There are three main education styles that are most common, and they are private schools, public schools, and charter schools. Today we focus on the differences between charter and public schools in Southern California, since prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, that was the talk of the town, so to speak. Since school has always played a large role in my life, I thought it interesting to find out more about the most recently prevalent schools I had attended. For the first major part of my education, up until third grade, I had attended 3 different private schools, and from third grade until 7th grade, I remained at one charter school, Soar Charter Academy. Then I moved to another charter school in the Leaders for my 8th grade year. However, for all 4 years of high school, I went to a very large public high school in my city, Yucaipa High School. Some of the larger differences I noticed between schools were size, teachers, and the education itself. The size of my 8th grade class was 60 students, while my incoming freshman class to high school was over 650 students. In case you couldn't tell, there was a very large shift, especially when you're new to the town and only knew a handful of people. The campus size and age range was obviously very different as well, considering a K through 8th school and high school are drastically different. I started to take notice to the differences because my charter school allowed you to progress and get ahead in higher classes, which was similar in the high school, except you wouldn't just be in a class of freshmen taking an honors advanced math course. It would be a diverse class with freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and even seniors, if you were high enough in the math curriculum. That wasn't the only shift I noticed, though. I noticed that the teachers behaved differently as well. Some may say that's because of the age, but I later found out it also had to do with what was required from the public school teachers, which was different than charter schools. In an interview I did with Christy Bray Phillips, an assistant director and homeschool teacher of a homeschool charter school, I found out some interesting information. In addition to her being a teacher for this charter school and others in the past, she also has 3 daughters who all attended a K through 8th charter school for their entire K through 8th education, before moving on to a public high school as I did. So her abundance of experience from the perspective of a parent and a teacher and administrator was very valuable. And so here's a look into the specifics of the virtual conversation we had. After asking her experience, I jumped right into her opinion of how charter schools and public schools differed. She informed me that every charter school is different. Some may mimic the way a traditional public school runs, and some may be vastly different. I asked in what specific ways, and she went into further detail about the fundamentals within the school, stating that a charter petition is written and approved by a school district that incorporates what will make their school successful and different from a public school or any other. The school may want to incorporate languages, different school times, leadership traits, homeschooling, and more. If a district approves the school, the district is responsible to keep the school accountable, but the charter school runs independently at that moment. This had backed up what I had originally sourced, finding that the California lawmakers had state-authorized charter schools stay under the control of districts after the, quote, overwhelming majority vote of 56 to 16 in favor of this law as of September 29th. I then asked her for more detail into her choice of charter schools over public schools, and she stated that charter schools are schools of choice, which means families can choose to go there and they are not mandated because of where they live. If the charter school is at max capacity, a lottery system is incorporated for entrance. Most charter schools are not unionized, and most teachers are employees that do not receive a tenure, which means they need to perform or they can be fired. A public school is run by the district directly. Students are designated schools by where they live. Families don't have a choice of the school. Public schools are unionized, teachers are tenured, and it is very difficult to be fired, even if they are underperforming. What I found most interesting about this was that the public school system isn't under the same requirements, which essentially means that they can get away with having the students, quote, teach themselves, but they still get paid the same because of the tenure that is put into effect. This clarified a lot of things to me as to why the article I read from New York Times describes Mr. Wilson, the superintendent of Oakland, California, being so interested in investing in charter schools and focusing on the improvement of the charter schools already in that system. He was very focused on charter schools because, as Mrs. Phillips stated, the teachers need to perform or they can be fired, unlike the public school system, which has that tenure in place to make it more difficult to fire a teacher once they had obtained that. I digress. Why the superintendent is so passionate about charter schools has now come to light. But let's continue with the interview to find out what her perspective is on the impact charter schools may have on the public school system. Mrs. Phillips states, quote, I think the charter schools challenge the public school systems. Families can choose to leave a public school if they do not feel like it's serving their student well, and this can push the public school system to provide opportunities for all students to succeed and achieve. Many people choose charter schools because they serve the whole child, not just their standardized academic needs. Quote, I believe this best exemplifies the need for charter schools in an education system, and Mr. Wilson, the superintendent of Oakland, California, agrees. In addition to these well-versed, educated options, the movie Unschooled, Save Our Future also develops a beautiful story to exemplify these beliefs. The concepts derived from this film portray the impact taking charter schools from these at-risk teenagers specifically and from their parents plays on the entirety of the society. A very key event in the movie is the Mothers on the March Mother's Day rally, where the children and their mothers unite to, quote, end the violence and save our future, quote. The main mother in charge owns a charter school of 200 students and is trying to depict the impact that she has on these children's lives by teaching them proper behaviors and key traits so they don't feel overcome by the harsh environment that they live in. But the mayor is trying to shut her school down. This is yet another example of charter schools taking in the needs of the student as a whole, and as Mrs. Phillips said, quote, not their standardized academic needs, quote, which have seemed to be the focus of most public schools rather than what's best for the students. However, there comes to light after deeper research that these public schools are feeling so threatened by charter school systems, and yet the standardized testing that the schools focus on are lacking in comparison to the charter schools. In an article I read about the charter school spending and saving in California, the spending of both schools is very similar in the overall budget. Their resources are just being allocated to different sources. However, the test scores are different as well. For mathematics, they're significantly impacted in charter schools versus public schools, and the English scores had no significant difference. But mathematics skills also go hand in hand with problem solving and critical thinking, which is a huge important concept in children, not just based on academics, but based off of their overall well-being. What I've found seems very interesting, and with statistical evidence for important differences in terms of student treatment and the impact these schools play on their environment, it seems very clear to me that charter schools are helping more than hurting. Their strong role they play in furthering the improvements on public schools is leaving them feeling threatened, as they should. The competition between the two seems to be only beneficial in my opinion, but you may form your own. And I hope you're feeling well educated on the charter school systems and can push forward with more knowledge. Thank you for listening.